All right, so we're here today with famous actor Orlando Bloom. No, wait, that's not right. Oh, Steve, my bad. Okay, so comic book writer and someone I've already talked to previously. I'll put a link down below. Steve Orlando, how you doing, Steve?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah. So as a quick side note, in my previous channel, Bruno's MMA show, we discussed this comic, or at least the first half of it, because you sent me a preview back then, and it
Yeah,
hadn't come
now
out
it's
yet.
out. Now it's out. We can see
Yeah,
the whole thing.
kill man. So this is from years ago. It's an MMA comic. Very dynamic art, fun use of colors. Kind of like an old like technique where you use the colors to instill a mood rather than going with like strict coloring. Like and it was co-written with Philip Kennedy Johnson, who's gone on to have a really cool run in Superman comics as well. And that was all before that. That was like we talked before this book was out, and it was really cool. It was really cool because there's not a lot of anime comics out there still, and which is surprising to me. I guess in Japan, but like as far as American comics go or Western comics. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Like now it's been many years, but this is the one we last discussed, so to speak. So how was the reception when it came out? How did you find it to for the book to be out there? Which was about an MMA fighter who gets outed as being gay. Like someone outs him; it wasn't his choice, and it's like a whole domino effect from there. And now that it's out there, what how do you feel about the whole project?
I mean, listen. To this day, that's one of the two books I say is my favorite I've ever been part of. The other's a Martian Manhunter book. I did it when I was at DC. Um, so it continues to be one of my favorite things on the bookshelf that I've written or co-written in this case. So in that respect, great. As you said, it was interesting because here, at least in mainstream comics, sports comics don't always do that well, but they're very big elsewhere, as you noted, like in Japan, and they're also very big
Yeah.
on in like the crowdfunding scene. So
Oh,
we had
okay.
we had responses from places you wouldn't expect, like outside of the capes, and even like mainstream indie publishers that mostly do action, adventure, and crime and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but also that's exactly what we wanted, like when Philip and I were on this podcast last time, part of the thing was we want people who haven't read comics before, maybe these kind of comics. So, um, it was a good response. It was extremely well reviewed, and to this day, like I said, it's one of the two books. And people come to my table at conventions or something like that. Oh, what's your favorite one? It's always this. It's always Killaman, or it's always Martian Manhunter. So, in that respect, it's you have to write a lot when you're a freelance writer. So to be at the top of the pack like this has been for 4+ years is, I would say, is pretty impressive. And I try to be humble, so it's probably because of Alec and Philip and incidentally because of my involvement. But I'm really, really proud of the book still. And it'd be great to do a re-release someday if we could.
Yeah. So this was released with Aftershock, and it was in back in 2020 when now there's been kind of like a boom. You mentioned like crowdfunding and all that, and I think that was still before it was a big boom of like self-published comics. um and now it's more and more of a thing. Like I see like big names more and more. Like I think artist Kelly Jones, and I forgot who the writer was. Like they were releasing like their own Dracula. Like it's kind of like you see like old names units, like everyone's like jumping in. And listen, Steve, I'm just gonna ask questions, and if any of them you don't, you're like, nah, Bruno, we're not gonna talk about that now.
Now,
You can
listen,
just tell me.
if I'm on, you can ask me anything. I
Okay,
think
because get me talking long enough, and I can get you in trouble with anyone.
no.
But but jokes aside, or not jokes, but I guess me testing the waters. Um, as someone who's a professional, like you're a successful comic book writer. You've written, like you said, DC Comics, Marvel. Like as far as being a comic book writer goes, like like I guess people like Morrison, Alan Moore, Frank Miller. This one you have to like I guess go for really big names to say like oh there's comic book success, and then there's like getting rich success, you know. But as far as like comic book goes, like you've made it as a professional, as someone who's like you've written like in all the IPs, I think almost. So let me ask you, at this point, when you have an original idea, when it's not like, oh, I really want to touch upon this character who's like been around for decades, and as a fan, I also want to write, and you have an original idea. Do you take it to a comic book right now, or do you crowdfund it at this point?
It depends
A
on the
comic book
idea.
publisher, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, but it depends on the idea because it's not necessarily, related to your quote unquote success level or if you've made it. I would argue that no one's made it. You're always making it.
Hmm.
The minute you relax, whether it's me or even those other guys that you mentioned, that you still have to be looking at the next thing.
Yeah.
That's just the way freelance is. And to that end, some things make more sense for crowdfunding than others. If it's a genre, for example, like us, like sports narratives that historically tend to be somewhat risky, in American comics, then you might look at crowdfunding because it's not that you couldn't necessarily find a publisher for that, but because it's a risky type of genre. What I mean by that is just sales wise, there's going to be a lot more fingers in the pie, to try to make it, to try to make sure it's a success, as if that's possible. So, if you're working in romance, for example, or any of those genres that are not necessarily huge, maybe you do want to do crowdfunding, because that means that at the end of the day, you're going to have the final say. Like you're going to be, you and your co-creators are going to be the ones deciding what the book looks like, and you don't want the involvement of a lot of marketing people, like anything, all the apparatus that come with big companies, and it's a great asset in some ways, but it does mean more people saying how to tell the story that you want to tell. So sometimes that fits, sometimes that makes sense, but sometimes, if you have a pitch that fits the type of books that an indie publisher does, then that's the right move, right? Like, you don't want to go to a publisher like Ahoy Comics is an amazing publisher. I've never worked there yet, but they do great books. But it is a satire and comedy publisher for the most part. 99% of what they do is satirical or comedic, and that's great because not a lot of other publishers do that. But with that in mind, if I had like a dark, gory horror book, that's not what you
Hmm.
bring them, right? So a lot of where you bring a book depends not necessarily on your status, so that is a factor because how successful you are and how well known you are. Publishers take that into account when it comes to marketing and awareness for the book.
Yeah.
But it's really about what is your idea, and then where is it going to be best told, and sometimes that is with a certain publisher who focuses on those types of stories, because every publisher sort of has a feel. It's how they market themselves.
Hmm.
Image does one kind of book, Vault does a different kind of book, Boom does a different kind of book, and so on and so forth. Or it might be that crowdfunding is the way because you just want to get it done and you don't want to have like a bunch of people weighing in on what the book should be and how it should be and things like that. So it really is a case by case basis.
And I guess also maybe putting aside any monetary factors, I guess when you have a publisher, if you know it's the right fit for what you want to do, or if they reach out with something you're interested, like I think it also removes a lot of the stress as a creative, right? I think one thing where a lot of creators tend to struggle, stereotypically speaking, is like the whole business aspect. And I think it allows you maybe to be like, okay, if I guess the way I see it is, if I go with a publishing house, I just focus on the work, and they'll take care of the rest. Whereas if it's crowdfunding, you suddenly have to be wearing many hats, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna do the
Well,
creative part.
there are different hats. I mean, it's very rare that you get to only worry about the story, to be quite honest.
Okay.
Even if you're at a big publisher, because there'll still be expectations that you're doing marketing hits for it, that you're doing interviews, that you're doing podcast
Yeah.
appearances, that you're giving press releases, that the ideas you're pitching them are going to be marketable. Like,
Mm.
so, because I'm a person who likes a weird book, right? And I would probably read a book about, I don't know.
Go
I
for it.
I could
Go
pull
for it.
something.
Brainstorm it.
Well, but that's not even what I'm saying. But like
Okay.
a lot of times, experimental fiction can be a little, it's not marketable by design. That's why it's experimental.
Yeah.
So, while I might want to see what happens if you publish a book that is just about one guy standing in a room for 40 days or something. Like, and the point is, a publisher will look at that and say, well, why? This is art, but it's maybe not a story. So what is the
Hmm.
thing that we're going to sell? How are people going to care?
Yeah.
So you have to, there's like you're always at odds. You have to think creatively and you have to think commercially. And
Yeah.
that's not being mercenary. I mean, if you are someone who's doing all crowdfunding, that's an example why when you would probably look to crowdfunding if you want to do something a little more experimental. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're artists, but we're working with publishers who function as a business. So you
Yeah.
do have to sort of think commercially, even though it sounds sort of obvious. Is this a story that people will buy? And if it's not, that doesn't mean you don't do it. But that is a time maybe you look at crowdfunding, because then you don't have to change what it is. You don't have to sort of like polish the edges and make sure it's the most appealing version. It's exactly your version, and maybe you do want to do that book that is just 40 pages of a guy like lighting matches. I don't know. The point
Yeah.
is that you can do anything. Um, and it's not that you couldn't pitch that book to Image, but they would say, well, why, this isn't going to make its money back, right?
Hmm.
So, and that's not evil. That's not a crime. I mean, publishers have to make money to continue existing. So,
No, definitely, especially in today's economy. Like, I think it would be foolish to not consider the, like, you know the economics of it, or like, okay, does this have a chance of making the money back? Like, you have to consider that. And you almost sound apologetic for it. Not apologetic, no, that's not the right word, but I can see that you seem to feel like, okay, this is something I have to explain. And I do think that sometimes, like in creative fields, people can get defensive of what they have to do. And recently, Kevin Smith was on Michael Rosenbaum, uh, um, like a talk show, and he was explaining how sometimes you do have to adapt to the project at hand, or to what the reality is. Like in this case, he was talking about like financing in movies, but like if the producers want certain things, that you might have to adapt. And I think that's what we're talking about. Is people will like certain companies will have certain parameters, and you have to adapt. And where's the crowd for this, and what's um the readers, and finding those readers. But I guess we're in a golden age in that creatives have that choice. Like, okay, if you have that weird idea, you can crowdfund it, and that is, I think that's amazing. I think that's something that you can get something out there, and find that crowd and ahead of time, so it'll be okay.
yeah,
Instead of, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and
Well, I think it's easy to romanticize what we do as artists, and look, we're lucky to have the job. But the minute you start working with a publisher, I think there's a logical disconnect that like it is also commercial art.
mhm,
Like the minute you're working with a major, publisher owned by an even bigger company, owned by an even bigger company,
yeah,
it is commercial art. So like you take that into account, for better or worse.
yeah. I mean, I do, as a reader, and again, I don't want to get you to any hot water, so please, like, tell me. No, we're not talking about this. Like, I'm gonna pick an example that is that is not political, but is like something that people are very passionate about. So I think this is like in that sense, it's a safe example to discuss. But because it has to do with a company that hires you frequently and all that, you can tell me if you don't want to discuss it per se. But one thing that, for example, if we look at TV shows, streaming, what it has changed is that a whole season can come out in streaming, and that allows people like the writers and all that to kind of structure it right ahead of time, like, oh, the themes, okay, this is going to resonate. If they have an idea later on, they can go back to the beginning of the season and write it in so it connects thematically. And so that's the advantage. The advantage of classic TV would be that you can adapt with what's going on, with like, oh, viewers really like this character, like Spike and Buffy back in the day. Like, James
Sure.
Marsters did such a good job. We're gonna keep him alive. If it had come out in streaming as a whole season, he would have died early on. So this character that viewers really liked would have been like written off early on, because then you can't. The whole season's done. You can't adapt to the fact that people really liked him. I guess it's fantasy. You can always bring him back and all that, but you know what I mean. I'm thinking specifically the Paul character in Spider-Man comics. So this is something that's I guess. I haven't read a single person like, and for those who don't know, it's a character who's currently dating Mary Jane, and people who kind of want Peter and Mary Jane to be together. Like the way that it happened, and this is one of those cases where I guess I don't know if it's editorial or the next writer really didn't want the relationship to be a thing. So I see things sometimes. I'm like, okay, clearly this is something that's making readers unhappy, but this is a medium where you can kind of like, I guess, adapt over time. But and sometimes I guess maybe the writer is like, no, I have this story in mind, I just can't tell you yet because it's going to spoil the whole thing if I do. So maybe the the current writer, and I think it's Zeb Wells, and
Mhm.
who's writing about Paul, like maybe there's something later on that everyone's going to go like, oh my god, that was why, like that could happen very well. Or if we go back to something that's already concluded, I guess, Hydra Cap,
Mhm.
Captain America, and like defense wearing. So I guess there's this element in comic books where you do want to keep your readership happy, right? But you also like maybe you have this story you want to tell. And have you ever had? Okay, so I'm not asking you to chip into the whole poll thing with Mary Jane. I'm not asking you to do that at all. But I guess I was giving an example. But generally speaking, have you as a writer ever had a moment where um, and I don't think you have, but you can let me know. Readers were really like, we're not digging this. And have you, if that happened, have you changed it, or have you stuck to your guns because later on it'll pay off? People just don't know where it's heading yet, or I'll convince them over time. Like, has this been a thing? Because I think it's a very real thing. Like something comes out, the story is like progressing over time, and your readership, which you want to please at the end, or but you also have your story to tell as a creative. So, have you ever had that conundrum, that challenge? I guess.
Oh, I mean, people threaten to kill me nearly every time a Scarlet Witch issue comes out. Someone said last week that I should be lynched. Um,
I guess okay. I don't
so
approve of that, but I guess they were being like,
but the answer is yeah, it's more than not dig. I mean, yes, I mean, people say that I should be killed on sight. So that's just for whatever reason part of the game, part of the gig this time, these days in comics. But it also kind of always has been, like I saw
I didn't know that.
I
That's
ran into
that's really
uh,
shocking to me.
I ran into Ron Mars over the weekend.
Yeah,
And I mean, he was getting death threats at his house in the normal mail in the '90s after creating Kyle Rayner. So it is a
I just got the trade for I bought the other day the trade where Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern that was back then the hero, where Ron Mars turned him into a villain. Yeah,
yes.
I
Well,
bought it the other day. Yeah.
but so the point is that yeah, like I mean, a lot it happens to me all the time. It happens to all of us all the time. Anytime that you, or at least anyone who's doing a story that is in any way not, upholding the status quo, it's always going to happen. It happened, as you said with Zeb and people not responding well to Paul, and as you probably know, I mean, people endlessly threaten to kill Zeb and dismember
No, I
him.
didn't know that. I didn't know that. I just,
Not
I
over
guess the
Paul.
places I read are healthier. I had no idea people were sending death threats over this.
But the point is that first of all, I mean, other than threatening violence, people have a right not to like a story. So, and it's important to remember. You're saying the response.
Yeah.
It's important to remember we don't hear from the vast majority of our readers in the advent of just because I mean look at it this way, in the advent of social media,
Hmm.
which promotes negative engagement. Like if someone
Yes.
says if someone says they like a book, that maybe gets a couple likes. But if someone says well, fuck this guy and we need to hunt him down, well then that gets a lot of engagement. So but the point is, obviously, I condemn violent threats against creators in the
So do I.
strongest
Yeah.
terms. But if you don't like a book, you can say whatever you want, especially about me because I'm nearly impossible to offend. But it's important for us to remember. Look at it this way: the in general, like even say like a quote unquote poorly selling book at the big two, it was probably selling 17,000 units.
Hmm.
And that's not a great number, of course, but even if you get even if you got 500 death threats online, even if you got which is more than you would normally get, that's a fraction of the people that are actually buying the book. And of course, the people that are loudest are the ones that are being negative because that promotes their own visibility. So, um, it's important to put it in context. Like I said, other than things that involve violence, I don't care. I don't care what people say. Oftentimes it's amusing to me, like kind of like celebrity mean tweets. But it's also important for us to remember when you asked about if you listen to them, you have to weigh it because, again, listen to the readers? Well, broadly speaking, sure. But what is the language they're using? Because if you're talking about the reader response on social media, well, that's a place where it's better to say something negative than positive.
Yeah.
That's a place where the more outrageous you are, the more you get noticed. So
So
you have to see it through that lens.
yeah. So
Um,
I do want to go back to what you told me about Scarlet Witch because I'm going to be interested in the why and all that. But I guess to reframe my question, because you're right. With social media, things get blurry, things get muddy, and then like people will shout and not
well,
shout,
the
they will type.
answer,
And
the
but
answer
let's say in
being,
sales, let's say there's because I am interested in the question of like when do you choose to maybe change your story. So I guess that question I'm still interested in your answer, but I guess you're telling me about your very direct experience as a comic book writer. Like, well, this is what happens. But let's say something that's more tangible, not like the very ill thought of, immature and immoral. Because I like to believe they're still just being assholes, right? They're not actually going to go after a writer physically. I like to believe that. But let's say if we put aside the comments and we're just going like the editor goes, okay, we're losing, or maybe that's never happened to you, and again that's why you keep getting hired. But let's say that okay, since this story sales have dipped and we think it's because of this, um when does it become like a factor? Has it ever happened, or it's just
well,
another
so
thing that happened to you?
no,
That's,
no. So I mean, it happens.
yeah,
It's happened to
I know
everybody.
it's a touchy question,
No,
but
it's
I'm
not
kind of
touchy at
curious
all.
actually. Where do you like find the balance, like?
It's not touchy at all, really, but it does
Yeah.
happen to everyone.
It would be for some creatives.
Uh,
You're more like tough skin, I think.
but the
Thick skin.
reality is that, like, the so the answer is you have to tell the best story possible, and even like and to an extent, of course, like you have to take into account sales, but without going behind the curtain too much,
Hmm.
since a lot of publishers left Diamond Comics, sales figures, to be quite honest, have become a lot more opaque, and that often will affect us as well. So, there will be a
Interesting.
lot, there'll be a lot of people online. There's a thing about in pro wrestling. There's an Al Snow interview where he talks about how familiarity breeds contempt, and that oftentimes a lot of people in the audience know enough to think they know what's really going on, but they really have no idea. So sales are a perfect
Oh,
example. A lot of people who are trying to win their wars against other
oh, dude!
fandoms.
When Tom Taylor was doing like the John Kent title, like they were being such dumbasses. Like,
Well, the thing is
ugh,
that, like, there are no accurate publicly related numbers. People will look to the things that used to be accurate or relatively accurate, which would be like Comicron or ICB2. But that is when the Diamond Comics was the near monopolistic distributor of comics. Now
yeah,
you will get numbers on there, but they generally only refer to what is still being distributed through Diamond, because DC and Marvel still put out some books through them, for example. So, people will look if they're, trying to win their war against some other fandom.
it
Oh,
was
look, this
so
character sells well.
it
This
was so
character sells
annoying. It was
poor.
so annoying.
But the
Um,
thing is that, like, they're just not accurate, right? And the point is that even behind the scenes, sometimes we don't get accurate numbers, or we don't get them at all.
yeah,
And so the reality is, you have to look at your relationship with your editor. You have to, which, they're a member of the creative team. You have to trust them. You have to respect them. And you have to, again, the number one obligation is to tell the best story possible. Now, what does happen is, even if we don't know the numbers specifically, we know the trends.
hmm,
So if we're starting a new arc, your editor might say it would be really good to get a first appearance in here, or it might be really good to get, to introduce a new character to the cast or move someone else
yeah,
off. Because even if we don't know the numbers specifically, we know in general, having been in the business for a long time, that an issue 6 is a lot harder to sell well than an issue 1 or an issue
yeah,
2.
yeah,
So you like in a grand scale, you will think about what is the fresh new thing for this arc. What is the new headline?
hmm,
How can what is the thing that's going to keep people excited or get new people excited to come back? So you think that way, um, and that's because you know the trends in general, right? But specifically, we often don't really know numbers to that extent these days. And in general, it's a good thing, though. It means, because anything moving away from monopoly is a good thing.
hmm.
Um,
I agree.
so the thing is you do sort of, I hesitate to say you make changes, because you don't necessarily have the info you would have had 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But you do when you're planning ahead. You know the way the market is now. You know you need some sort of big thing at the beginning of an arc. It's why we brought Joseph back in the second arc of Scarlet Witch. It's why I mean it's why things will be happening in the upcoming arc
Yeah.
that's starting on Wednesday. It's why for an issue four, it's why Spider-Man was the guest appearance in issue four of Iceman, because at that point you need something to get a little boost in there.
Yeah.
And of course, then you look at how does it affect the story with Spider-Man and Iceman? They've been friends for a long time, so that was a natural fit. Um, and if it's not a natural fit, then you get the story out of there too. One of the things that we didn't get to do in Scarlet Witch for reasons that will become apparent when the books come out, is we were looking to do a Deadpool crossover.
Okay.
And the part of that is that they're not a natural crossover. So how do what happens when you mash them together? They're very different characters. But then that becomes something that can get a headline.
I
They
guess you could. I guess if I had to spitball, and I know you're gonna ignore any idea I throw. Don't worry.
Well, the point
But
is Deadpool couldn't show up, so you can say anything you
uh,
want because we had to
okay,
we had
cool.
to kick him out.
So I would have approached with the mental health aspect. I think that's what I
You
would have gone
certainly
for.
bond over that, sure.
Yeah. I don't know exactly why I'm like just an idea, but I think that's how I would have approached it. Like I think when you do a crossover, the fun is in finding what they have similar and what's different from there, and what are their views from that similarity. So one crossover I really like from the 90s is the first Spider-Man Batman crossover, where it kind of starts with their very similar origins. He lost Uncle Ben to crime. Spider-Man did.
Hmm.
Bruce lost his parents. So from there, how did they like deal with that trauma differently, and then how are they similar? And that was, I think, a very solid crossover because of that. And I think that's kind of like in my brain, that's the outline of how you cross over characters who are not necessarily similar. You kind of go like, what do they have in common, and that informs you also as to how they're different, because you
No,
go from that.
exactly.
Yeah. So I would have gone to mental health, which I know it you can't just like write it willy-nilly, or maybe with Deadpool you kind of go with Deadpool to cover your bases if you're not sure about certain things. But I think because there are characters who historically have both had issues, and now I want to be transparent. I haven't read your Scarlet Witch run, and I want to ask you about that. But first, for myself to get something out of my system, because it's bugged me, and I never had like this chance to talk about it online. It's true. When Tom Taylor was writing the John Kent Superman, the initial arc,
Hmm.
and this is a bisexual Superman. Like Clark's son is bisexual, and I kind of like keep my finger on the pulse. So I follow like many people. Not not everyone I follow on social media I agree with. So just to be clear, if people look at my follows, I don't agree with everyone, but I like to kind of know like where the vibe is, what people are saying, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I like to not be in an echo chamber. Um, but one thing that really bothered me was like everyone's like, oh, like woke Superman, and at the same time, the dude who's been in our previous conversation, Philip, was writing freaking like gladiator Superman in space, like classic Superman being a badass gladiator in space. Like, look, not everything is for everyone. Like, I'm not gonna buy a Barbie comic book. Okay, I'm like a straight white dude. Okay, I'm not gonna buy. Maybe I would if someone were to write it in a way that interests me. But and I don't have an obligation to buy everything out there to support everything. No, like I'm gonna buy what I want to read. However, what really bothered me is it was very hypocritical. It was serving their agenda. They were like, "Oh yeah, look, this is the Superman we have now." Well, concurrently in Action Comics, it's classic Superman. It's not his son. It's classic Superman, and he's being a badass gladiator in space. What more do you want? If you want your manly man Superman, traditionally, and it was just ridiculous. It was pissing me off because they're like using like what do you blinders, like what do you call it when you put on a horse so it doesn't get distracted. And then when you mentioned how a sixth issue is hard to sell at first, so in today's comics you often have they often reboot the title to a number one, and you might keep the same creative team or the same writer, like everything is working, we just want to put it back to number one because that sells better. They did the same thing with John Kent. And again, oh, see, they're canceling the title. I'm like, no, they're not canceling it. They're just changing the title. They're finishing this one, and now it's gonna be what? Well, the titles change so often I can't keep track anymore. But so it was just as this whole thing where I was just looking at it like, wow, people just want to bitch about something, and I don't need to agree with everyone. Like, if you come with something, look, this is my opinion. Okay, that I don't share opinion, but I get it. But this was really something where people were. Um, I don't know if willingly for clicks or they were really just like stopping at the headline. They just looked at it and they stopped looking further. But it was just like ridiculous. But I did think that I know you're not Tom Taylor, so we're gonna move on from that. But I thought that his response to Dean Cain was pretty classy. Where Dean Cain was kind of complaining, the previous Superman actor of the '90s was very conservative. He was kind of complaining about it. Oh, it's just superficial. If they actually touch on these issues, and Tom Taylor was like, actually, I did touch on these issues in my run, and he was like, oh, then I'll read it, which I don't think he has, but yeah, it was just like one of those things where like I really see how every single thing is weaponized, even things that make sense business wise, and like we're gonna reboot to a number one. Oh, they're canceling the title. No, they're not. They're just renaming it. Sorry, another question for you, but I guess
No,
this
I
is what
mean,
the
what
place where
you're
I could get
talking
out of my
about
system. Yeah.
is a bad faith argument, and that's
Yes.
what's going on.
Yeah.
And like in the case of the thing with John Kent, it's very common, because
Yeah.
if something doesn't fit the narrative, like their own narrative,
Yeah.
and their own sort of platform, then you just ignore it, and that's the essence of a bad faith argument.
Exactly.
And it also kind of invalidates the argument. It's easy to, like if you want to, in real life, if someone is trying to convince you of something or get your attention, they tend to say things that are true. So, I mean, people of course have a right to go crazy and claim that they made Superman bisexual, but as you said, that's not technically, it's truthy because they're both named Superman,
Yeah.
but it's not true in the
It's
way
not
that
Clark. Yeah.
they're positioning it. I mean, I used Maxima in when I was in Wonder Woman,
Hmm.
and she's a lesbian. And of course, everybody saw me, a bisexual creator. Oh, Steve Orlando has to make everybody gay. Well, listen, she's been gay since the New 52. You guys just didn't read that.
Yeah.
You know, like,
That wasn't your thing. You just continued what
you know,
someone
it's
else
not
dropped
Steve
there.
Orlando. It's actually Scott
Yeah.
Lobdell that made her gay, but you guys didn't read it, and it's okay that you didn't. And it's okay that you didn't read it, by the
Yeah.
way. But then maybe check. Don't pop off.
Yeah.
Like so, and so you just got to chuckle about it. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's happened, but they fit they have these narratives, especially when you're a marginalized creator. They love to say, oh, a self-insert is the thing
Yeah.
they love to say, as if that's a bad thing, even when it's not accurate, because the argument for that, if you think that a self-insert is always bad, I would ask you if you enjoy Sandman, which has maybe one of the most famous self-inserts in history,
Yeah.
when Neil just made himself the most powerful being in the DC universe.
Right.
um,
There's a
and
time and place. There's a time.
but more to the point,
Yeah.
um, it's all superficial. I mean, people,
I don't. I love how you just describe Sandman. I love it,
well, I mean,
and I like Sandman. Just to be clear.
because there's nothing wrong. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with putting some of yourself into a work. That is what you
Yeah.
do. But I had to laugh. There's
I think
people
maybe
have
if you
said,
contradict how a character has been portrayed before, I think that's when maybe you can start getting a bit.
well, sure,
Yeah.
but it's often, like I created Somnus at Marvel, and people said that that was a self insert, and
But
which
if it's your character, that's fine. That's
but it's also not, like
yeah.
the thing is there's nothing wrong with that, but again, the
Yeah.
bad faith argument, you can
Yeah.
find the interviews where I say that it was based off my neighbor, and you can see me and
Yeah.
see that I'm not I mean, I'm not North African like him. I'm not from Canada,
Yeah.
and I wasn't born in 1920.
Okay.
The he shares a
I'm
last
glad we
name.
clarified these details now.
He shares a last name with our family in Italy, but that's what it is. But they see that he's a gay character and assume that being bisexual is the same, so he must be a self-insert. And it's not that they can't say that, but it just kind of invalidates any positive or actual, like, tangible arguments they might have,
Yeah.
because they've only done the surface level read.
Yeah. It happens a lot.
Especially with that, because like I have whole interviews where I was like, this is my neighbor before I moved was an older gay man, and I was moved by hearing his stories, to be horrific stories from the AIDS crisis, to be quite honest.
Okay.
And I wanted to give this character. I can't give him a second chance, and I said this in the interview. I couldn't give him a second chance. He's 74 years old, and we live in the real world. But I could, do a similar thing, and homage him and honor him through this character. But if all you see is me and you look at that character and you see that we both, I don't know, have a face and are in some level queer, oh, it must be Orlando putting
Yeah.
himself in a book. The irony is that, the closest I've been to putting myself in a book was Midnighter, because we already have the same personality. I just don't kill people,
Yeah.
that you know of, allegedly.
Yeah.
So, so it
Yeah.
is,
Don't worry. I'm not gonna bring up our private conversations here.
but it's all, like it, people, as you said, it all boils down to a bad faith argument, whether
Yeah.
it's Tom, whether it's, take your pick.
Yeah.
And that's okay, even. But if you are someone who has a point that you think is valid, it's best to not try to make it that way, because it's just not compelling, to be quite
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, and Tom got it from all sides because he also, at some point, some people were also angry that when John Kent revealed to his mother that he was bisexual, like the way the page was made, there was like a hint of like, oh, is she gonna disapprove? Which, well, if you know Lois Lane, you don't. But I personally read it as what someone goes through in their mind, like, okay, are my parents going to approve? I thought it was a very valid way to approach a person. I'm straight, okay, maybe I'm missing something, but I thought just addressing the fear of it was very valid. But other people were offended. Oh, why would you even hint? Because it's stressful for me to read it, you know. So he got it. Tom got it from all sides. Just doing that title, like like everyone went for him at some point or another. It was just like baffling to see, but yeah, I want to talk about Scarlet Witch because you
Sure.
um did some so what was it that made, I guess we're gonna veer after that in a more positive direction for this conversation, but really we will. But what was it that made people or some people I should say bothered by the title?
Um, I mean,
After
it's
we go more positive, that we need to. But
well, look, I'm trying to find the right way to say this.
just go for it.
There's a section of the fan base
Hmm.
that has expectations of stories in general,
Okay.
that are sometimes at odds with, um, well, the expectations of our editors, who want us to deliver, a story with struggle and character motion. And there's a lot of unfortunately, the notion I spoke to when I mentioned the Al Snow interview. People that, they learn words online and they think they know what they mean, but they don't. Like, and I will not point out specific things, because that's not fair. But the
Hmm.
average commentator online doesn't actually know what a plot hole is. They don't actually know what, like, character development is in an actual educational, like, craftsmanship sense. They don't know these things. They know their words, but as when they talk about how they are or are not appearing, they reveal that they don't really know what they mean.
Hmm.
And this isn't. And by the way, like, there's nothing wrong with that, because when I go to a mechanic, I don't fucking know, like, all the terms.
Yeah.
That's why I go to a mechanic.
Yeah.
So, and yet I still buy a car. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But once again, when you talk about the bad faith, this isn't bad faith, but there's a like a hyper confident, uh, a character, like, personal characteristic, along with, unfortunately, not necessarily the level of information that should go along with it. And the thing is, too, is that, once again, like, people can want whatever they want, but oftentimes some folks will fixate, or focus on things. I shouldn't say fixate. They'll focus very strongly on things that are either, not germane to, our needs as storytellers, and, things like power scaling. And that's not just Wanda, that's Jean Grey, that's any big character.
Oh yeah, especially
And
Jean Grey historically has had depending on the moment in time in comics, like that's a very variable power scale. Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that, but the thing is that that we can't. That's not what a story is about at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And if we pitch that, our editors would reject it. And, things like show don't tell, they don't really know what that means. They just know it's a phrase. Um, and I'm trying to think of, and other things that, once again, like, they don't know how the sausage is made. So they will really push for things with certain parts of the creative team that are just not in our control. And again, like, that's frustrating, because you can't really pull the curtain back, but that's their right. They can say whatever they want. So a good example is, like, not specifically Wanda, because I won't. I mean, it's just not fair for me to speak specifically about one sort of audience, but in general, um, readers rightly so often speak up about characters of color being colored too light, for example, and they have every right to. I completely understand why it is important to them. However, they often sort of come to the writer and without passing.
You didn't choose the color is chose.
Well, and the thing is that like we are not in charge. We're part of a team, and so,
Yeah,
but you don't necessarily know that because of the way. And by the way, this is not their fault because
yeah.
of the way companies often market us. We're often the ones that speak for the creative team and things like that. But at least, but at the end of the day, to be clear, a colorist does not work for me. I
Yeah,
can.
you're not the showrunner. Like they might get it confused with like the showrunner of a show, which
Uh,
so that aspect is beyond your
So that's like, honestly, like when I see people speak up about that, in my case, and I do push. I mean, we've been very lucky with. I mean, we're on the same page often in Scarlet Witch editorial specifically. We're on the same page with how Wanda should be depicted. So this isn't even something that is about Scarlet Witch because we
Mhm.
have sort of solved it for the most part. We can always be better, and there's always slip ups, appearances in other books. Books are rushed, but on the whole, we're on the same page, and we've been lucky. But what breaks my heart is that, they have a right, if they feel that this character is important, not, I shouldn't say it, if the character is important to them and they feel that they
Mhm.
haven't been depicted in the way that they're used to, then that's understandable and they have a right to speak up. But what breaks my heart is when, oh, like, let's say it to this person.
Yeah,
Because the
yeah.
reality is like often we agree, but we're not in charge. And unless we're super famous, we're also not in a position to make demands. I can't tell
Mhm.
my editors what to do. Those are my bosses.
Yeah.
So it's once again like you don't know what you don't know, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that because that's just how anything goes. Again, when I buy a car, I don't know how a car is made. I mean, I could look it up, but the point is like that's why I go to people who do it for their job. So oftentimes people get really, really hot about things, and oftentimes it's completely justified. But once again, they're operating not with necessarily the knowledge of the industry that, um, well, that they would need to be making these kinds of arguments,
Mhm.
and that's when we get into a quandary because publishers are in no way obligated to pull the curtain back. You don't
Yeah, yeah.
so it's complicated, and people do get very passionate, um, and it can be about any number of things. And the thing to remember is that if it's easy for creators. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a saint. Sometimes I do get really frustrated, but either because I can't do more or I'm doing everything I can, or I'm
Mhm.
not doing the things that folks think I'm doing because, again, of them not knowing what goes on behind the scenes. But it's important to know that other than when things get violent, when it comes to commentary, like if they're doing this, it's because this thing is really important to them. Things like, if Wanda having curly hair is really important to you, that's not nothing. I might not be able to control what every artist I work with draws because once again, they don't work for me. But I understand why it's important, and if people get that passionate, yeah, I try to remember that regardless of how outrageous sometimes it gets,
Mhm.
it's coming from or a valid place.
I
Uh,
mean, look, I get annoyed
yeah.
when like I don't know, like Tim Drake or Dick Grayson get drawn overly bulky. So it's no, it's true. It's so yeah, I understand. Like
So
uh
it can get outrageous sometimes, and I wish that like that can be frustrating. But for the most part, even the wildest commentary is coming from a place that is valid. Maybe the way they express it, I'm going to be
yeah,
generous and say it could be expressed in a little better way.
yeah.
But and everybody has something. Look, man, I speak Russian, and I think it's hilarious that Colossus still says "Bože moj," which is like a grandmother phrase. Uh,
Well, because when he started like this Great Caesar's Ghost, right? With Perry White, right?
like in
Well, it's
Astonishing
like
X-Men, he finally said "short," which is when I lived there, what most people would normally say, isn't I mean, granted, I lived there in 2007, so idioms have probably
we're
changed.
coming back to that. You speak Russian and you
I
live
mean,
there?
poorly now, but I lived there in
Okay.
2007. Yeah, but like I was like, oh, they finally had him say it, and now we're back to "Bože moj," which again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it basically means "dear me," like it means "my
Yeah.
God."
But
It
then
means,
again, I do think it's something that Colossus would say. Like, dear, like I feel like if he's such a big nerd that I feel like he would be like, "Oh dear me," like he's so proper and all that. That I have
I
no problem.
mean,
And I don't even mean with the extreme that the Deadpool movies went to. I just mean like traditionally, he's kind of like this big dork who just happens to be like built like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, like and I don't have an issue with that. But I like that you told me that
Come on,
it's like
Bruno, he's built
cheap.
like George Hackenschmidt, the Russian lion, not like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't even know who
Um,
that is. See, so
Hackenschmidt is the guy that arguably began professional wrestling. He was a shoot
oh,
wrestler in the early 2010s and a fitness icon. It's worth looking up if you're a sports guy because
so
it.
kid shoot wrestler was someone who actually knew how to mess people up,
Well,
and
yes.
it's not just a choreography. They yeah,
Well, I mean, well, because yeah, so he had a big rivalry with this guy Frank Gotch, because back then wrestling was quote unquote real,
yeah.
and for whatever reason,
I mean, a lot of respect for the choreography and all that, of like the predetermined or whatever.
yeah. But
A
I'm
lot of
saying that
respect. Like
it
it's
was a true athletic competition back
yeah,
then. Now it's a display of athleticism.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, like him and Gotch had this series that apparently ended up being worked in the end, at least on the Gotch side, and
Okay.
it sort of. But before that, he was this and continued to be this fitness icon. Wrote many books about about wellness and things like that. Kind of like he was kind of like an earlier version of Judo Jean LaBelle, where
Okay.
he was just like very fit and active well into his very late life.
Hmm.
But anyway, that's a digression. So
Well,
yeah,
how come you lived in Russia though? That's interesting to me.
it was one of my majors in college. My grandmother's Russian, or was.
Oh,
She's
okay.
passed since then. And she was extremely long lived. So in when I started studying Russian in 2004, that was when I started college. Um, she was 97 years old.
Wow.
So and by virtue of being that old, she had no one to speak her native language to. No one else in my family is Russian. Everyone else is Italian on that side. I started learning it so she could speak her first language again.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And then well, she did pass when I was in Russia when she was almost 101.
Yeah.
So that's why I started. That's why I studied it. Um, yeah, I lived in Vladimir, which is not a major. It's not a huge city, but it was the first capital of Russia going back into the 900s. So it was a cool place to live, and gorgeous, complicated, just like any big country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I live there, and my Russian is fine now. It's been like whatever. I mean, 17 years, right? 16 years. So it's been a minute, but I can still get by. I can certainly do phrases for Colossus and any other Russian character in comics.
That's a good pitch if I ever heard one. It was it. I'm not very like knowledgeable regarding Russia. Back when you went there, w- was it an issue for you to be in Russia in some way? Like you know, like given the fact that you're bisexual, and was it like something where you were like, I guess I'll just talk to the ladies over here until I get back home, or
We
how was
were.
Russia back then?
I mean, it's not like it is now, but we were encouraged not to pursue those interests.
Okay,
Uh, by well
but you're lucky you're bisexual. You at least had the other
for
option.
our safety by by the
Yeah.
people running our program. But to be clear, it's not there was not a lot of time for anything
Okay.
other than traveling and doing classwork. I got to
Yeah.
see Kazan, which at the was closed during the Soviet period. It's a really cool city. It's long. I mean, it's 36-hour train ride from Moscow. But it's it's semi-independent. It's one of the only cities in Russia where there's a mosque inside their Kremlin,
Okay.
because it's semi-independent. Um, and just a really cool town. So I mean, I got to see things that, I mean, for my college, no student had ever gone there, because even when my professor lived there,
It wasn't
professors lived
open.
there. It was that specific area was closed to foreigners because they would have been in the 1980s. And people could visit and you could do exchange programs there, but certain areas were still. And to be fair, even when we went to Sochi, where they were at that time bidding for, and then would go on to have the Olympics, and we could go certain places, but there were places that were just for Russian citizens only, which is I have no complaints there. But yeah, so you got to explore a lot,
I mean, whether you complain or not, it's not going to change
and
it.
you were yeah. But I mean, but I think that's reasonable, is what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that's unreasonable. And like it's an amazing, complicated, especially now,
Uh, yeah.
country. But the scale is what struck me, like never mind that, everywhere outside of America, we're always like, oh, this building is 100 years old and there were never buildings before this.
Uh,
And meanwhile, like where I was, the city I was living in, the gates, which used to be the entryway to Russia in the 900s, were over 1,000 years old, so there's
wow.
that. And there's just the size. It's the biggest country in the world. So, as I was driving to the airport to leave, finally, my cab driver mentioned to me that the county that I was living in was bigger than Germany. Uh, so
Yeah, when
it's
you look at the map, it's like this massive, massive land.
so it was interesting, but yeah, a complicated place, needless to say. And as far as our family, the thing is where that part of my family is from, despite my grandmother, she would say that we were Russian, or she was Russian. And that was true when she came over. But today it's actually part of Poland and part of Ukraine, where we were from, where we're from was called the kingdom.
Oh,
It was called the Kingdom of Galicia. And back then that was part of the Russian Empire. I mean, because this was the early 1900s. It was before even the revolution. But yeah, now, I mean, we wouldn't, we would be most likely Ukrainian, to be quite honest.
yeah, yeah. These things can get confusing, don't they? Like, I mean, in regards to like historical identity, national identity, like in places where the borders have changed and all that, and um, yeah, it's that's fascinating. I didn't know that about you. I didn't know you went to live in Russia for a while. Or how long do you say you were there?
That was one semester, so 6 months.
What's what? That's quite. That had you traveled much before, or was it like a big culture shock? Or
I mean, going to the other side of the planet is pretty far. I mean, I had left the country, but not in any way like that. I mean,
okay.
I've been to Puerto Rico. Obviously, I've been to Canada because I'm from upstate. It's right there,
Hmm.
upstate New York, that is. But no, I mean, going across the planet, I don't think, other than if I ever go to the two Comic Cons in Australia, that's probably the biggest trip I will make.
Okay.
Um,
Um, so like we're almost at an hour, and I really want to touch base upon this because you've written Midnighter, and then you've concluded your Midnighter run with Midnighter and Apollo, where they go to hell, fight Neron is the name
mhm.
of that. Yeah, which I think we hadn't seen in a while. I think you're the one who kind of brought him back because we hadn't seen him in a while since the 90s. I think.
Yeah,
Roman, yeah,
he was
I
on
kind
and
of went
off.
away since Unleashed, Underworld or Unleashed, and then I
Yeah,
guess he popped up a little bit. Morrison, I think, brought him up during JLA. I'm not sure, but I think you're the one who kind of like brought him into the 2000s, right? Am I wrong?
you are absolutely right. Because I
Yeah,
think, I mean, it was post New 52, and we were sort of figuring everything out.
yeah, that was cool. I read your Midnighter run, and listen, it's been years. It's in my boxes. It's like a whole pile of boxes that's not organized, and yeah, but so I wish I had been able to just pull it out and reread it before entry. So I'm gonna go with memory, but back then I remember like I love continuity. I love when people like when writers connect the dots, and if you can just bring back a character, oh yeah, this one rule at least one part of hell, I love that shit. um so that was really cool. I thought it was really cool when you brought Neron back. I was like, oh my god, it's true, because it makes the world feel. And I know like there's a lot of like you can't avoid continuity contradictions. I get it, but if you can allow me to pretend it all fits together, I'll be really happy.
Well,
So
I think the way is like, we, especially the companies where I don't think have a plan.
no,
Have a,
that is very clear to me.
but no, no,
And
no,
that's okay.
no,
That's
no.
the
This is
nature of the
important.
beast.
I,
Okay,
I that was half of the statement.
sorry.
They don't have like 100-year plan, and what I
Yeah.
mean by that is a lot of the continuity issues are that, I don't. I genuinely think in 1938 that National Comics did not think DC Comics would be around in 2024. How could you know?
That's
So a
yeah.
lot of these things. So that's what I mean when I say when they don't have a 100-year plan. I mean a lot of these things are coming from the fact that, um, to be frank, I don't think people knew, um, that these characters would be around. You never plan on having, you never plan on rolling the dice and throwing a Superman, right? You can't,
Yeah.
and then you do. So, um, these issues, we have to keep coming up with new solutions, basically, because And you saw that going into 1986 with Crisis and things like that.
And the
Um,
KG Beast now has to be made into this, where he used to be a normal dude. Now he has to be enhanced because if you want to
yes.
keep him as part of the KGB, the age wouldn't fit anymore. So now you have to make him kind of like an enhanced human. So things have to, sometimes you have to kind of like tweak it up a little bit
And
to make
that's
it
the
fit.
thing.
You know,
I try to think of it like I think inevitably we're going to get to a place where it's and we use this a lot for evergreen titles, like things like The Dark Knight Returns, things like any of those big things. Like we tend to say, like, if you squint, they make sense. If you look really close, there might be some things that don't line up, but the core of the characters makes sense. The core of the characters have continuity.
yeah,
And that's not to say we don't try to make everything fit in, and I, I to probably an obsessive degree try to with my own work. But the
yeah.
fact is that, yeah, like famously, when I was at DC, people love to say that my former boss hated Nightwing, and hated Wally West,
The deal, yeah,
and he might have, but
dude. I Nightwing,
but the logic he would say to us, it was more that
yeah,
they frustrated him because, the Robins and the Kid Flashes and those characters, those are audience tie-in characters. It's like the opposite of a self-insert. They're like slots for readers to insert themselves into the story from their side, not the writer's side.
mhm,
Robin was created so that you could feel like you were hanging out with Batman. Same with Kid Flash.
yeah.
The thing is that those characters age faster than the characters that they're sidekicks to. So, I mean, joking aside, the reason a lot of those characters frustrated my former boss is that eventually he would joke that eventually Dick Grayson was going to be older than Batman. Uh, and that's a little bit of a joke, but at the same
No, no.
time,
It like how many
look,
generations? Like the fact that Damian Wayne now is a teenager,
right? So how long was
it
everybody
starts
Robin?
adding up,
A
right? Yeah. So
couple
everyone
months?
is criticizing the 5 year and Batman in New 52 or the 5 year timeline, and then but because they were like, oh, Robin is being an internship now because for all the Robins have been there within a scope of a little bit more than 5 years. For Batman, they made a concession. He had been around before superheroes blew up, so that was kind of funny, but there's maybe a point to that. Maybe there's maybe a point to that argument that at some point, if you want Damian Wayne to become a teenager, you do have to maybe say, you know what, maybe Dick Grayson wasn't Robin for 10 years. Maybe he was Robin for, I don't
10 minutes.
know.
So, but no, I mean that's so a lot of times with continuity we try, but I do think a time is coming where it's I think it's a complicated thing too. Listen, I am a Capes reader. I've been one since 1987. I do think it's hard for me to. I had a moment where I realized that the average, like the casual reader, like in the same way that we love to say casual wrestling fans, and I would bet that the same argument is made in the mixed martial arts community. Like, just to be frank, like they don't care. If they're the person that picks up a Wolverine book at a bookstore, like a
Mhm.
collected edition, probably doesn't. They just want a fun Wolverine story.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that continuity isn't important. It is.
But
Uh,
Steve, listen, you need to understand. When you put Neron in there, instead of just coming up with some other devil, you made me so happy, dude. Like, because I love that shit. I love when things fit together.
well, that's so. What I'm saying is that's
Yeah.
the sweet spot. You want to tell a
Yeah.
story that rewards people who've been following the continuity, but also is not isolating people or
Oh, so
keeping out
someone didn't
people.
need to know who Neron was. Like, you didn't need to know that he
Exactly.
was the main villain of a 90s crossover called Underworld Unleashed. And, how old am I now?
Exactly. If
Let's not
we've
talk
done
about
our
that.
job, both people are happy. Both groups are happy.
Yes, I agree. So that's the same I very much agree with. I think you can't get bogged down with continuity, but you also have to reward people who have been around for a long time.
Absolutely.
To give an example, the voice actor of Principal Skinner in The Simpsons mentioned that the episode where it was revealed that Principal Skinner wasn't really Seymour Skinner, like that punished people for paying attention. You don't want to go that way either. You don't want to go like, I'm not going to give examples over here. I know at the beginning of the chat I was like coming up with concrete examples. I'm not going to do that anymore because you have friends to keep and all that. But um,
Well, sometimes listen, but
yeah,
you can, because to be quite frank, there's a reason Marvel created the no prize. Like the no prize is for when, to be frank, we fuck up.
fair
Like
enough. But
that.
but you don't want to punish people for paying attention. I think that's the kind of like where you don't want to like do something that's completely um like now I have to like now this makes no sense. And then sometimes it kind of happens by accident. For example, like in New 52, year one was so beloved, everyone's like, no, year one still counts. And then at some point, or writer certainly acted like it was, and then Scott Snyder did the 0 year when the editor was like, "Look, it doesn't fit anymore." Like, Jim Gordon's son can't be a baby at the beginning of Batman's career anymore during the New 52 at least. So all these things happen, and but I think if it's all done in good faith, where the writers at least try, like Morrison. Look, Grant Morrison, help me out here if I don't, because Morrison is now they them, right? So they, is that how I say it? Like, they, when they wrote, I don't know. I'm gonna do my best. When they wrote the Batman run,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, okay, everything counts, but maybe it counts in a like, but we're still gonna try to make it fit thematically into the current run. So stuff like, for example, Batmite, where there's a scene where Batman goes, "Look, are you really an infant fifth dimension, or are you just an hallucination?" And then, like, "Oh, Bruce, like, imagination is the fifth dimension," and that, oh, paraphrasing, but that was so cool because you can have your cake and eat it too. Like, I think it's kind of nice when no one ever needs to go back and read the Batman stories to read Batman, Rest in Peace, or R.I.P. I don't know if it's still for Rest in Peace after all. If there was a twist there, I don't remember. But in Batman R.I.P., you don't need to have read the old Batman stories. But it's kind of cool if you have read them before and you go like, okay, imagination is the fifth dimension. So if you've never read Batman before, to you, Batman is probably a drug-induced hallucination that the villains drug Batman, and he's seeing that. If you read the old Batman stories, it's probably Batmite. You know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
can kind of like go with it, and I thought that was really cool. But Midnighter, before we wrap this up, and I guess, I said we'll go positive. Let's go really positive. Um, it's very likely that James Gunn is going to grab some stuff you did so far, because even on Instagram today I saw Midnighter and Apollo. They mentioned the going to hell for each other, which is your story,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it's become pretty significant. And so James Gunn is going to bring Midnighter and Apollo, which I understand you didn't create those characters, but you kind of like certainly left your stamp on them. And are you excited for what's to come? Are you excited to see if they're going to grab some of your stuff in there for the movies?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I didn't I never conceived that those characters would be on this, at least the big screen. I could see them fitting for TV and things like that. So no, of course I'm excited. I mean, like we are fans too, even if they're different hats to wear.
Yeah.
Um, I think that soon Tom King is going to block my number. I keep asking him for details. But luckily I have a couple burner phones. It'll be fine. Um, I am. I mean,
Yes,
listen,
Joey's involved.
I'm intrigued to see who they cast as them.
Oh
I've been
man.
I've been saying Luke Evans is Midnighter for years, and I still stand by that because he looks like him and is actually a gay man. So, like,
Oh, I
despite
didn't know that. I didn't know he
but
was gay.
but has not traditionally taken stereotypical roles. Not that there's anything
Yeah.
wrong with taking those, but
No, I think people like gay actors out there doing both at the same time are good. Like, they cover all the bases for people to look at. And I think Neil Patrick Harris playing Barney Stinson has probably helped a lot of people who might have been more close-minded before to accept gay people more. Ironically, because he's playing this womanizer, they loved him there, and then he turns out to be gay. And I think a lot of people back then in the early 2000s or mid 2000, mid the noughts, I don't know. I think it kind of made him come around to, like, okay, like, Neil Patrick Harris is cool, which is a funny way. But I think both things are very legit. I didn't know Luke Evans was gay. He'd be a really good Midnighter. Yeah, he'd be really good at it. And I think he's doing like this role. I don't know what it is. Like, he hasn't, like, he's certainly like a successful actor, but it's not like he has like this one role that, not Dracula. Like, that didn't click.
listen, I actually like that movie. But you're right; it
Yeah,
did
I
not.
like it too. I like it too. I just mean he doesn't have that one role yet.
Although talk about some awkward casting, not for him, but for the Sultan. Anyway, that's a different podcast.
Oh,
Um, I mean, Dominic Cooper, I do not think has Middle Eastern blood and has made a career out of playing Middle Eastern people. He also played the Saddam Hussein at one point.
I think you should avoid him then. That's a casting, not his fault. But okay, listen. You know what? I mean, okay, maybe you know what I would do if I was in charge of casting Midnighter and Apollo. Check it out, Steve.
What do you got?
I would cast Ben Affleck as Midnighter and Henry Cavill as Apollo.
I mean, listen, I think it'd be funny. I can't lie to you.
I would 100% do that. I mean, no, it wouldn't work. I don't think they take the roles and all that, but and I'm sure people would complain that they're straight actors, and but part of me is like, listen, like the Batman we got in Batman v Superman, to each their own. Okay, I'm not complaining about the Snyder movies. To each their own. But that was certainly more Midnighter than Batman. So I would say the way he went around killing people, I was like, that's Midnighter wearing Batman's outfit to some degree.
Yeah,
No,
I
no, that's
mean,
not true because Midnighter likes to have fun. So he was
I
a
was
very
gonna say he's
miserable.
not as funny. That's
Yeah,
exactly
you're
what I
right.
was gonna
Yeah,
say.
I was just making a joke here, and but that was literally your run was like I said in a previous conversation that was like Batman having fun, and you told me that was your pitch. I think you told me. So I was like, you got it right. That was Batman having fun. The Midnighter run that you did. Um, yeah, yeah. Oh, Dominic Cooper as Midnighter. I like it. And Apollo. Who do you have for Apollo?
Oh, I don't even know. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. I forget who I used to say. I think I used to say Matt Bomer. Um, but it'd be hard not to say Luke McFarlane now, who was like the meaty dude from Bros, but he's kind of got the market cornered on being like a muscly himbo. Not that Apollo is one, but there's an innocence to him that I think fits Apollo. He's a nicer guy than Midnighter.
Yeah.
So that's got to be, it's probably my answer right now, but it changes all the time, and inevitably it's going to be people who are no one we said here. It's going to be someone you've
Oh
never
yeah,
heard.
no, of course they're probably gonna go with and probably young actors that they can keep around for 10 years or something for a franchise. You know, like the AP. If James Gunn's DC movies work out, you wanna have people who 10 years from now can still wear the costume. You know,
Sure.
so probably that. Um, yeah, but that was such a fun run, and again, like I know, like it's like every reader is different, but for me, like when you bring little nuggets of continuity there, like that was really cool. And I gotta be honest, I was first the one thing, and you brought it. You know what I was saying at the beginning. Sometimes readers can complain, but the writer knows where they're heading. I was annoyed, but I understand why. I understand why, because if it's a solo midnight run, it's hard to like. Why doesn't Apollo just punch a bad guy now? Like so you broke them up at the beginning, and that kind of was like, oh, do you have to do that, like break them up? And but then you at the end they ended up together. You're like rescuing each other from hell and all that, so that was cool.
Yeah, and
uh
the big thing with that was like when you had read them before in Wildstorm.
yeah, I hadn't, by the way, like I just
Well, the logic there was like they were committed to each other there, but they had had 5 years to figure that out off screen. They had been living on the street for 5 years together,
yeah.
and when they did the New 52, they had, I mean, I mean, basically were each other's first relationship and had known each other for five
It's true,
months.
they reset it. It's true, they
So
reset the
for me, it
relationship
was
at the
like,
end.
I'm not going to criticize the work of people that came before me, but I was
Yeah.
like, let's create a chance to have them actually like work for their relationship and get to know each other like real people do. Because as presented, it was people deciding that they were madly in love and the one for each other, having never been with anyone else after like 4.5 months, which not to say that that doesn't happen. It certainly
Mhm.
does. There's billions of people in the world, but it's not necessarily the most relatable story.
Yeah.
And relationships are work. So, I mean, yeah, there was
To
a
be
little
fair, it
bit.
was within, I think it was in Stormwatch, right? So it was like a group title, so you kind of when you have like a whole group of characters, I think you kind of shorten up some aspects, like
Yeah, it was more the
yeah.
speed with which they committed and decided they were madly in love. I mean, that to me, because I do take everything as, like I want to respect the work, that to me was like, okay, this is very obviously the honeymoon period. Oftentimes there's problems when that wears off.
Hmm.
So, we saw problems. They split up for a while. They came back together and
Yeah.
at least hopefully it felt a little more earned, which is really all I was looking for. I mean, as we know, we're like relationships are work. It's never like in the movies.
Yeah.
So um the goal was, yes, always to bring them back together, but to have them feel like it wasn't like this utopian. It was like a couple you could relate to. Of course, with superpowers, but still.
Yeah, no, but that's fascinating to me because back then when I read it and I was enjoying the title, but I was having this criticism. Oh, of course, they do a solo title, so it's kind of like, um, I don't know what it is about me. I don't like when they break up like iconic couples in comics. I just don't like it, and so I was kind of, but then now you're telling me this, and I'm like, that was the goal all along. Sometimes you just have to go along in the journey. And then at the end, it was very earned. It was like, wow. And then it kind of came together like, wow, that this is like really, it was really like in a non cheesy way, but really sweet. You know, like it was really powerful. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And and yeah, I like, I don't know. Like sometimes I feel like in comics, like sometimes you feel like a character's history, and that cannot be avoided. It's like a yo-yo, you know.
Mhm.
But sometimes it feels like too much, and but in your case, it was really with a purpose, and it came around to that, and in the end, it kind of reinforced what I do like about couples in comics, like, so it's interesting. It's just like, because now it's coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning, if people don't like something at first, and then but I simply thought it was like one of those things where, well, if Apollo's around, like, it's going to be too easy for Midnighter, so I need to get rid of him. That was my take on it. But then you're coming at me with this like much more thoughtful reason why, and I think, I don't know, that I think that's a good place to leave it. That's a really, I'm happy we got this out of the conversation, because me as a fan, I get to be like, hey, look, this is what I thought. This was a complaint I had, even though I wasn't trained as that. Well, this is a complaint I had, but then at the end, I was very happy with it because they end up together again. And then
Mhm.
you're telling me like, well, see, this is why I did it, and it makes so much sense. Um, with James Gunn, I feel like we might see stuff like that, like them going to hell, and I feel like with James Gunn, we might, I don't know if that'll be the case, but I think he's gonna go for the more over the top DC things that we didn't think we'd see in live action. So I wouldn't be surprised if the story you wrote makes it into the big screen at some point, in some under some form or another.
Well, I wouldn't be sad about it. I got to put an addition on the house, so that'll be helpful.
Yeah, and the trades, right? Like you'd like, I'm pretty sure you'd get some
We hope
commission
it.
there.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, yeah. So see, I
But
told you we go on a positive note.
for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Steve. Well, listen, it's been over an hour. Thank you very much for coming back for a second. I mean, first time on this channel, but second chat with me. Really appreciated. Years in the making, and last time we chatted about Kill Man, the MMA comic, and I'll put a link down below to my previous channel. That was a really fun conversation as well. And now, and back then, I rein it in. I can't geek out about comics like DC Comics, Marvel. Like, I can't go there because we're here to talk about this specific comic, and now we got to geek out about comics in general. So I'm really happy about that too. Let's see if I can bring back the other two at some point.
Hell yeah,
Alec and
absolutely.
Philip. Let's see if I can drag them back kicking and screaming. But yeah, well, thank you very much for your time. Anything that you listen, you actually, let's take maybe a moment here. What are you currently writing? Let's go for that. Let's end on
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I'm on Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
I'm on Spider-Man 2099. I was just announced for Avengers Assemble, which is starting in September, an Avengers book. I'm doing Gotcha Man at Mad Cave right now. I'm doing a book called Scale Trade, which is about the illegal dragon trade coming out from Magma Comics. There's a lot out
Sounds
there,
fun.
so we're keeping busy, and there'll be more. There's more to come, of course, as well.
Okay. Real quick, Avengers Assemble. What's the team?
I mean, it is a team of classic Avengers. It's a Firehouse style book. So while the main team is off in the Impossible City, Steve Rogers has assembled like an instant response team that is operating out of the Avengers Mansion, similar to how you have people always on duty at a firehouse.
Okay.
And it is well, it's Steve Rogers, Hawkeye, Clint Barton, She-Hulk, Hercules, Living Lightning, Julie Power, aka Lightspeed. There's more too. I'm just losing my mind. Shang-Chi is on it, Photon,
Okay.
the Wasp, Night Thrasher, and
Oh
I'm
my
just
God, Night Thrasher. There you go. That was a
uh, and Wonder Man. So there's a ton of classic
Wonder Man.
Avengers characters on it.
Okay. Is Shang-Chi, was ever since the movie, was he given any powers in the comics, or is he still just doing kung fu?
He does have the 10 rings
Okay.
as of his solo book now, so he'll have those in the book too.
Okay, cool. Okay, I was curious because very often when something happens in movies, they kind of bring it to the.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. I don't. I've never seen that phenomenon.
No, Spider-Man and his web. And okay, listen, Steve, thank you very much for coming to the show. It was really fun. Thank you for pulling back the curtain, and thank you for your openness to discuss subjects that even at some point accidentally for me, I didn't know some things were could get that dark. regarding when people are not happy. So thank you for your openness in discussing these things. And yeah, everyone, thank you for watching.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.